and welcome to another edition of To The Point, Tech.eu's series of video interviews with leading entrepreneurs and investors from across Europe. Today we have a very special guest. We have Andrea Zitna. She is a partner at Speedinvest, which is, of course, a very well-known pan-European investment company with over 600 million euros in under management. She was previously Chief Revenue Officer at the Elvie, which is a very well-known Femtech brand, a very well-known grown-up, I would say, in the European tech sphere. So we're very delighted to have Andrea with us. We're going to have a chat about the health tech ecosystem here in Europe and why she decided to go from operator to VC, as her Twitter bio also states. So Andrea, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Robin. Hi, everyone.
So Andrea, you're originally from Bratislava, Slovakia. Is that correct?
That's right. Born and raised in Slovakia.
And now you're based in London. So when did you move to the UK?
It's been an on and off love affair. I've moved the first time for university. Then I left again, actually went and lived in Prague for a couple of years, came back, then disappeared again for a couple of years. And now I think I can call London permanently my home.
Right. So let's talk about your career before Speedinvest, before we get to it. Where and when did you start your professional career?
So my first couple of years were actually in Prague, and I did physics originally as a degree, so I was a scientist by background. And to be honest, I was very confused about what to do, like many scientists, I think, at the time. And consultancy seemed like an interesting launchpad to learn a lot about loads of different sectors, and it catered towards my analytical skills and interests. So I joined McKinsey, and that was the start of my career. Initially in Prague during what I would call happy years of growth, pre-crisis, mostly focusing on Eastern European markets at the time. So there was loads of work in consumer sectors, but also in healthcare, typically around growth. So, who to buy or what to launch, who to merge with. Then I got a slight itch to go somewhere a little bit smaller and actually learn some of the commercial skills firsthand. And so I joined a business development role at Nectar. Nectar at the time was actually one of the first, I would say, truly data analytics, data science companies out there, but people mostly know it as a loyalty scheme group. Then I went to do my MBA, because as a scientist, I still felt like there was more I wanted to learn, and I wanted to briefly get to know the US ecosystem. So I went to the States. Came back to McKinsey, and then my itch to go and build continued. And about 2 years in, I decided that I wanted to go and start my own thing or join somebody else's very, very early stage business. And I knew that I wanted it to be in the intersection of technology and healthcare. And at the time, serendipitously got introduced to Tanya Bowler, the CEO founder at Elvie, went over for breakfast, and basically the idea of Elvie Trainer, which was the first product at the time, got under my skin. But the bigger vision was the main reason why I joined. I just thought there was so much opportunity to completely reimagine how tech was designed for women. And I loved the idea of going in so early. It was just 4 of us at the time, and building something from scratch, so pre-revenue, pre-product, and trying to see whether we can actually pull it off. And the rest was then 7 years later down the line. The Elvies nowadays, as you've called it, it's a well-known brand in the tech European scene. It's a grown-up company. It's got 2 key product lines, so breast pumps and pelvic floor trainers, completely reimagining quite stale, uninnovative categories for women's healthcare. And I, somewhere around the Series B, Series C, so when we circa 200 people in the business, I got the itch again that I wanted to go to that early, messy stage of building, but I wanted to do it at scale. I saw so much potential across digital health in Europe, and I wanted to find a way to work with multiple businesses at the same time. And that was my initial impetus to look at VC. And then when I looked at the European scene, I looked at funds that were really working at the earliest stages and working in a pan-European way in health. Speedinvest quickly topped up the list, and then I did the jump to the other side.
Great, fantastic. That's already quite a good overview of your career. But let's take maybe a step back. After your second stint at McKinsey, you said you joined Elvie because you sort of looked for a company that was in the intersection of health and digital technology. But why was that the case? Was that something that you sort of saw when you were at the consultancy firms? working with that where the potential was, or was that just like more of a personal interest?
So one of the main reasons why I decided to join the intersection of, where I was excited about the intersection of healthcare and technology was, number one, healthcare remains one of the least digitized industries out there, so decades behind sectors such as financial services or retail, which have been completely transformed by digital. And then secondly, I think my heart as a scientist, I was always attracted to the intersection of science and technology, and I thought healthcare is this place where scientific breakthroughs are reinforcing each other and where there is a huge opportunity for social impact as well as commercial impact. And therefore, for me, it seemed like a sector that I really wanted to dedicate my next career chapter to.
Yeah, I think you picked a really good company. Elvie, when you joined, was still very, very young and very, very small. By the time you left, about 6 years later, it was quite a grown-up, hitting $100 million in sales, I read somewhere, in 2021 when you left. So that's quite an achievement. What was it like on the inside?
Honestly, it was like many early stage businesses. It was full of highs, but also lows. It felt like you were in the middle of tornado a lot of the time, because you were constantly growing very fast. You were trying to fix the wheels whilst the car was sprinting. So it was one of the most memorable chapters of my career. And I think that especially the initial couple of years for me personally were incredibly rewarding because the feedback loops were super short. You were immediately figuring out whether you're doing something right or wrong. You could fix it. You had a 360 view of the business. So I joined as a first non-product hire and then became chief revenue officer, so mostly focusing on commercial aspects of the business later. But that to me was a very special phase. It's not something that's I think everybody likes and suits everybody because it's very chaotic. But I like the challenge of putting some structure on top of chaos, constantly prioritizing, trying to bring business models to life, trying to figure out how to sell a product in a completely new market, how to disrupt the stale market. I thought it was a lot of challenges packed into a really incredible mission.
Was it a conscious decision to go to the investment side, or was part of you also sort of maybe thinking maybe I could do my own company, start my own business?
I was torn between the two, and I thought about it quite long and hard. But I think for me, it was a combination of living through COVID still whilst on the Elvie side and seeing the inflection point that happened in digital health in Europe, but also globally. It sounds like a cop-out, but I just had a FOMO. I just couldn't quite decide what would be the one idea that I wanted to go deep again into, and I wanted to find a way to work on multiple and support multiple ideas and founders in parallel. And that was one of the main reasons why I ultimately decided to switch. And I just thought VCs play a really interesting role in the ecosystem, especially in the earlier stages in healthcare. And I wanted to have a front seat to the innovation that was happening.
Great. Well, a front row seat you have now. At Speedinvest, you lead the Series seed to Series A investments and in health tech for Speedinvest. You also got promoted quite quickly, didn't you? Because you joined in January 2021 as a principal, and you made partner last month, which was July. So congratulations for that. But that's quite a fast track, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, Speedinvest was. To be honest, since I've joined, it's been like a crash course in loads of different things, and it's been a really fun. I've had so much support, so I'm really, really grateful for the trust that was placed in me. I think as a fund, there's quite a long history of backing operator profiles, so it wasn't the first time it happened. But yes, it was relatively fast. I also joined at the time when the market was at its roughest, so I saw that stage of the markets, and then obviously during the first part of this year, the markets have turned. So I feel like overall it's been a very packed 9 months, and I think at the time our team has made about 6 investments. So I've seen loads of different business models, loads of different founders, and problems being backed, which was really interesting.
Yeah. I also know that Speedinvest as a firm also does a lot of research into the space, health tech, but also the other sectors that Speedinvest invests in. What have you learned from that research that you didn't know about the health tech space before you joined?
So I think one of the most interesting insights for me was piece on exits that we've done late last year. So 2021 overall was a year of all records. So all records were broken, including exits. I think circa 50% of exits of the last decade actually happened in 2021. But I think one thing that a lot of people maybe don't realize when they think about healthcare exits is most of exits are still happening to digital health scale-ups in Europe. So other digital health companies buying the less mature, the smaller digital health companies. So it's not pharma, it's not medtech, it's the key acquirers. And I think that whole piece of analysis was actually really insightful for me. And it shows that Europe has so much potential, but it's still also at the beginning of a journey. It's nowhere near the maturity of the US ecosystem, for example.
Yeah. But then, of course, if you talk about health tech or medtech or whatever you want to call it, if you talk about digitizing healthcare in the first place, there's so many different aspects and elements and fragmentation also in the industry, but also geographically speaking. So where do you start? Or what are some of the interesting areas in healthcare that you want to take a deeper dive in?
So I think in terms of geographical footprint, we are truly pan-European fund, and we do focus on the first stages of pre-seed and seed. That means Europe is the heartbeat of a company and where we look for exceptional founders. In terms of topics, it is quite broad. And if you look at our portfolio, we've got about 22 businesses at the moment, and they span consumer models as well as pure B2B plays in healthcare. But I would say there's a couple of topics I would highlight that I get very excited about, that we continue to zoom on. One is really hybrid care. I mean, we've seen, again, inflection into this model happen, also be exacerbated by COVID. But we believe the shift is permanent and healthcare will stretch well beyond the walls of the clinic. And I get excited about businesses that could power it. So through a combination of data, infrastructure, or pure reimagined delivery models. And I think that's a theme that we're going to continue to look at and continue to be excited about. Another huge topic would be businesses that are doing the next generation sort of digital tools that could help digitize some of the most antiquated areas of healthcare. And here I would highlight a couple of topics which are maybe not top of mind for some folks out there, but for me, regulation compliance, really, really interesting space, and the one which is still driven by pen and paper, a huge backlog, especially driven by the MDR regulation, is out there. And I think there's a lot of innovation that could happen in that space. Procurement, supply chain, another interesting area that we keep on looking at in healthcare. So there's still these huge topics and huge buckets where the next generation of digital tools could make a real difference. And that's another key theme that we keep on getting excited about and monitoring.
Great. What about the Femtech space? Is that something that you are particularly drawn to, given your background at Elvie and, of course, your interest in the sector in general?
Of course, I think there's so much still to be done in women's health. Women's health research overall is starting from a back foot. There's been decades when women were not included in clinical trials. And I think when it comes to existing level of insights data, but also care pathways, it's really lacking across Europe. And I think UK actually is an interesting case in point. At the moment, women's health strategy is actually top priority for the government. So it feels like the right time, the right place also for loads of very innovative femtech companies to be scaling and growing and innovating right now. I do get drawn to those topics. We've actually made an investment in Below Down quite recently at Speedinvest, which is a personalized contraception platform, but with a much bigger and broader ambition in women's health. And I do think there will be interesting wave of scale-ups, but also consolidation happening in this space in Europe. And I would love to continue backing the founders in this space. It's a ton of opportunity.
Great. And how do you rate the investment community when it comes to health tech in Europe? Are there enough specialized investors, enough vertical investors? Is there enough sort of general interest and knowledge within the European VC space to really, back enough entrepreneurs?
I think it's definitely growing up along with the sector overall. And I think, so you have generalist funds which are quite active in healthcare. Then you have the pure health focused funds. Then you have funds like us, which have vertical focus. And then you have a specialist medtech investors as well in the ecosystem. And I think increasingly more and more people are starting to be interested in health. So including also family offices, there's very active angel groups, especially across the key markets in Europe. So I do think the ecosystem is maturing along with the sector. As you have more exit produced, you have more talent produced, you have a whole network effect coming into play, you've got more funding coming in, you have more global fund looking into Europe, which is also bringing all of us up. So I think the sector is getting there overall, and it's a really interesting time to be in the space.
Yeah, I can imagine. But those are all the positives. Do you also see any roadblocks on the way, or what's the biggest problem that the European health tech ecosystem faces today?
I mean, Europe overall is a hugely fragmented and regulated landscape. So, going to market and scaling across the borders, especially if you, for example, are pursuing business to business models, is very hard. So it does require a longer term view, patient capital, really experienced teams and sort of advisors around the table. And I think that still represents a bit of a challenge because, again, European landscape overall is just much more nascent, for example, versus the US. So if you look at the number of unicorns, for example, in Europe, I think it stands roughly at 8. So it's still graduating and still scaling and still getting there and still showing the world that it's possible to do really big outcomes and big success stories in Europe. So I think that's a bit of a challenge, but I think we're getting there. I think another one is obviously because of COVID, all of the pressures which the public healthcare systems were already under are exacerbated. So cost, access, staffing, and I think that's not going away. And therefore, anything which is much more focused on the longer term innovation but doesn't have immediate ROI is difficult to be prioritized within the budgets, which is where the private sector could play a very significant role and could come in and back some of those impressive innovations, but it's hard to sell those into the public healthcare system. So that's another pertinent challenge. And I think last one is there's a perception across Europe that people are not willing to spend for healthcare because of a good quality public healthcare provision. And I think that's gradually changing, but that still is here, and it's true. I mean, for a lot of healthcare, people are not willing to pay out of pocket and expect the provision to be provided by the public healthcare systems. But again, I think there are pockets that are really underserved because they just don't come up high enough on the priority list in the public healthcare system. And again, women's health, I'm just going to point to back at, is a good example of it. Here in the UK, I think it needs a complete overhaul in terms of pathways and in terms of focus and budget.
Great. Well, those are great insights, and thank you so much for sharing. We're going to wrap it up as a final question. What would you say is the biggest myth about the healthcare ecosystem in Europe or the UK, where you live, that people still believe in?
I definitely, and I don't know if this is right or wrong, but when I first switched tables to the VC side, and especially because it was during the frothy market conditions, I got a little bit of a sense that people assumed that very, very fast growth with more capital and kind of make and break and fix model was also applicable to some digital health models, and that just, in my mind, just doesn't work. I mean, you've got one chance in health, for very good reasons. It's a very regulated industry. Safety, privacy is paramount. So I think that was one aspect that I felt like was also starting to seep into health. So kind of more capital means more growth, and I don't think that's necessarily true.
Yeah, that's a good one. Thank you for closing on that one. Andrea, it was a real pleasure to have you on the show. I hope you enjoyed it as well. Congrats again for making partner in such a short time frame, and I wish you all the best at Speedinvest.
Thank you, Robin. It was a pleasure.